Welcome, everybody, back to the Captain's Quadrant. I am so excited to sit with a legend in the art world, music, movies, everything you could think of. I'm sitting with the great Nicholas Meyer. Thank you so much for joining the Captain's Quadrant and sitting with us for this wonderful interview. How are you today?
I seem to be fine.
There we go. Great way to start. um, you have just dropped a brand new Sherlock Holmes book, and the title of that is Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing. It is a fantastic read, and I encourage everybody that's watching and or listening to go pick up a copy. Links will be in the show notes to make sure that you can go and grab right immediately. But you're also on a book tour right now. So where can folks expect to find you during the tour? What's left on the legs of the travels for you?
Tonight, which is, I believe, September the 29th at 6 p.m., I am at the Mysterious Bookshop,
Oh,
which I believe is at 58 Warren Street in downtown Manhattan. And I'll be talking about the novel and signing copies of the book. And then I believe it's on the 2nd of October, I will be at Brookline Books in Brookline in Boston, Massachusetts,
yep.
talking with Edwin Hill, and I think that starts at 6 o'clock. But you can get a hold of. No, it starts at 7. It starts at looks like it starts at 7 in the evening. Um, that would be on the 2nd of October
All right.
in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is near Boston. My
Yeah.
mother was from Brookline, so I can remember.
Oh, wow. My father was from Fox Point, Rhode Island, so we spent a lot of time in Boston because
Never, never said hello.
yeah, I know. Shame on him. Um, so you've written multiple Holmes novels over the decades. In writing this one, how is your approach different from your earlier works?
Well, I don't know that it was the approach was different. The subject matter was different. I
Hmm.
got interested. This is a book about art and
Yep.
art forgery. And
Hmm.
forgery is an interesting, not to say totally perplexing, series of rabbit holes. What's the difference, for example, between a forgery and a copy? Something you can't see, the intention. A copy announces itself. It's labeled, I'm a copy. You can buy me at the museum store.
Hmm.
A forgery tries to pass off as the real thing, and so forth. Forgery raises a host of ethical, legal, cultural, aesthetic questions. Um, and it gets very perplexing. Successful forgeries, of course, are probably not detected. And that means that there are houses and museums around the world that house paintings or sculptures that are not genuine, that they're fakes. They've been crafted to pass themselves off as the real thing. And what happens, this is another hypothetical question, if you've you interact with a work of art that really deeply moves you, that shakes you to your foundations. Interactions of that sort with art are sometimes called the Stendhal effect, after Stendhal, the guy, the novelist, who describes sort of, you burst into tears or whatever. Um, and let's say you see a painting by Rembrandt or Vermeer or, I don't know, Ellsworth Kelly. And you are totally thrown and moved by it, and then you learn that it's a fake. Where does that leave your feelings? Um, Put another way, you give your fiance a diamond ring,
Oh,
and it's a substantial diamond, and there's no question that it's a real diamond, except that it was made artificially. It was zirconium.
no.
Um, does that sort of invalidate the emotional or and possibly the monetary value? Of course, it's very hard to tell a zirconium at this point from the real thing. So I guess that's why I wrote a novel called Sherlock Holmes and the Real
And the real
Thing.
thing. Perfect. Perfect. Perfect.
And of course, it's a meta statement because, like, it's a Watson manuscript, but is it the real thing?
Right.
Um, or is it Mrs. Meyer's oldest at work?
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so I shared with you a story about getting a fake myself, and I remembered there was a church that I work for. It's Old First Church in Newark. It's First Presbyterian Church now. And there was this beautiful Monet that was hanging in the hallway for years. And I was like, oh wow, I can't
And a
believe this.
Monet?
This is the problem. I thought it was a real Monet. You killed it, but it was sitting there. It was beautiful. The church was built in 1666. It was founded by Aaron Burr's father. So that's how old it is. And I'm like, yeah, I believe that that would be a real Monet. Sure, 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 sure. For years. And then the pastor that we have now, fantastic pastor, she comes in and she goes, oh, yeah, take that copy down. And I was like, what copy? And I worked for an art historian for years. And I was like, I can't believe I was duped. So, going into your book, I see that the forgery and authenticity are major themes in this world that you've written. What drew you to the idea of forgery, both literally and metaphorically? Because I've been duped. So I wondered, did you buy a painting yourself and it got caught you, or?
No, no. What happened to me was in 1974, which is to say the Pleistocene era before everybody was born. I wrote my first Sherlock Holmes novel, and it became the number one best-selling novel in the United States, much to my astonishment. And I was sent on a book tour.
Mm,
And in those days, the publisher paid for the book tour, especially if you were on the bestseller list.
right.
And so I was a kid. I don't know, I was 28 years old or something like that. And I landed in a thunderstorm in Pittsburgh.
Oh,
Very,
yeah.
very rough descent. I was very green about the gills. I felt like a bean in a gourd. And I was met at the airport by a reporter about my own age who clearly thought this assignment was unworthy of his
Oh,
talents.
mm.
And so he began by saying, how does it feel to be a successful forger?
Oh, wow. Oh my God, I can't believe I would have.
And must have opened my and closed my mouth like a fish, like a goldfish. And I finally managed to say, well, it doesn't actually say by Nicholas Meyer. It says as edited by
Mm,
Nicholas Meyer. So technically, I'm not, and we fumfered on from there, but I went to sleep in a strange hotel in Pittsburgh that night. And I thought, well, I guess I hadn't really taken this seriously, but I suppose I am a kind of forger. I just assumed everybody would think I was kind of playing a literary game. We would all know. But, then when somebody said to me, well, when did Sherlock Holmes die? I realized, okay, a lot of people don't understand any of this and
mm-mm.
think this is a found manuscript, or possibly, as this man said, I'm a forger. And that
Mm.
got me interested in forgery. I
Oh,
was very, and as I say, the moment you get interested, you find yourself confronted with these rabbit holes: legal, moral, aesthetic, cultural, um, political. Um, and forgeries are pernicious. I actually wrote another novel, Sherlock Holmes novel, about a forgery called The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols. And that refers to the protocols of the learned elders of Zion.
mm.
The learned elders of Zion is the most vicious and successful forgery of all time.
Oh,
Um, it was published or disseminated in about 1904 by the secret police of Tsar Nicholas II, the Okhrana, and it purports to be the minutes of a secret meeting of Jews plotting to take over the world. And they've never gone, no matter how many times they have been exposed as fake, and they're fakes. Um, they are, taught in the Middle East as textbooks. That
yeah.
in Egypt that was made into a television series. In the 1920s, Henry Ford published all of the protocols of the learned elders of
Mm,
Zion
that
in
tracks.
newspaper.
Yeah.
Um, and he got sued and he had to close down his paper because they're fake.
Yeah.
Um, and that forgery is not so funny.
No.
Some other ones, and so as I say, there are Renoirs or Modigliani's. There's a wonderful movie, short movie by Orson Welles called F for Fake. And
Oh.
if you and your listeners have never watched F for Fake, it's a brilliant examination of this whole subject by Orson Welles, who learned that a very famous forger named Elmire de Hori lived on an island called Ibiza,
Mm,
Ibiza, in Spain,
yeah. Beautiful island.
where a lot of pleasure seekers live. There was Elmire de Hori, who forged a lot of Modigliani's and Picasso's and so forth. And he lived there, and nearby was his biographer. Guy wrote a
Mm.
whole book about him. And that guy turned out to be a forger himself.
Oh, wow. It's like a circle of fake.
His name was Clifford Irving.
Mm.
And Clifford Irving forged the Howard Hughes diaries. He probably got the idea of being a forger from writing a biography of Elmire de Hori, and he thought, "Gee, anyone can do this." So if you Google about the fake Howard Hughes diaries, there's even a movie about it starring Richard Gere,
Oh,
terrific movie called The Hoax.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, forgery is in the air, and now that we've got AI,
Oh.
and then there's another kind of forgery which isn't an exact copy. Um, the French call it à la manière de, in the
Oh.
manner of.
Mm.
So it's like if you say to chatbot or something, make me a Van Gogh. It won't make you a literal copy, but it will attempt to synthesize aspects of Van Gogh's style and produce a painting that's like it. Then there's
Mm.
another category,
Oh.
which we call an homage. And,
Mm.
and so when Marcel Duchamp took the Mona Lisa, or a picture of the Mona Lisa, and drew a mustache across the Mona Lisa, that's a sort of an homage, and there are
Mhm.
various versions of where you take a painting and you add something to it, or you take something away from it. Um, you're not copying it, you're not forging it, but you're commenting on it.
Mhm.
You're so there's a lot of variations of this, and I spent years after being accused of forgery collecting books and articles and seeing examples of forgeries. And here's another complication. All works of art are inevitably, invariably, ineluctably products of the times in which they are created.
Mm.
Mozart doesn't just sound like Mozart, he also sounds like late 18th century Middle European music. Renoir doesn't just look like Renoir, he looks like 19th century French Impressionism, right?
Right.
If I were to show you 5 movies, all set in the year 1776, American Revolution, and one took place in 1920 or was made in 1920, one was made in 1950, one was made in 1972, one was made in 2000, and so forth, you would be able to tell
Hmm.
within 5 minutes and 5 years when those movies were made. A million things would give them away. Is it
Yeah.
black and white? Is it color? Is it silent? Is it sound? How long are the eyelashes? What are the politics espoused? How is the revolution viewed? And so forth and so on. It would give it away. And that's okay. We're used to the idea that art is a product of the time in which it's created. But that plays hell if you're a forger,
Hmm.
because your forgeries are also going to be products of the times in which you create them. So, for example, there was a very famous forger, a Dutchman named
Hmm.
Han van Meegeren. And Han van Meegeren forged the great Dutch painter Vermeer. And his paintings sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they were in museums and people, and he was a famous forger. Now, when you look at Van Meegeren's Vermeers, they're terrible. They stink. They
Yeah.
look they look like Art Deco.
Mm.
You can't believe that these were ever mistaken for the real thing.
Mm.
And I'm sure that my Sherlock Holmes forgeries will inevitably, with the passage of time, say, oh, yeah, this is late 20th century Nicholas Meyer.
I don't know. This is a great book. I mean, even the depiction of
It
how.
doesn't mean it can't be good.
No, no, no. That's true. That's true. But I understand what you're saying. But like even the method of which you kind of describe with the pumice stone and how they like kind of take it and make their own with it. I feel like that was a great way to explain how to even attempt to a forgery. And was a very interesting aspect because the way that the the chemicals would go into the cracks because time weathers everything. It doesn't matter if it's a building or a painting. There's going to be things, and restorers have to take so much time into like really getting those fine details to make it not look like suddenly it's a forgery. So that was a really interesting juxtaposition.
And by the way, another rabbit hole is what we call restoration.
Mm,
Um, we assume when we go to a museum and you see paintings on display that you are seeing them more or less in sort of the pristine state they've always been.
right,
But in fact, uh, paintings, like anything else, uh, they age.
right.
And the varnish start. A lot of paintings have varnish on them to sort of preserve them and stuff. But the varnish itself turns yellow and starts to crack and so forth. And I visited some restoration departments. I went to the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and
Oh,
I was
wow.
taken into their. It's a huge department. It's
Hmm.
a huge department of specialists. They showed me a painting um, by an Italian artist, a woman artist, whose name is something like Artemisia Gentilischi, something
Oh,
like that. She
that
was
just
a
sounds silky.
Renaissance lady painter, Renaissance woman painter,
Hmm.
and it had been in Beirut, Lebanon,
Oh,
and the building it was in had been bombed,
oh,
and the painting was incredibly shredded, and they showed me a photograph of what was left of this painting. And
hmm.
then they showed me the restoration process by which the painting was put back together. And it
Wow.
was put back together by artful people who knew what they were doing and knew how to do it and had a lot of time and money from the Getty Museum in which to put this thing back together. Um, but when you exhibit it, unless somebody tells you, you would never know that a lot of work had been done on this. There's a whole documentary that your listeners may want to watch. I think it's called The Lost or The Last Leonardo. Um,
Mm. Sounds
and
familiar.
it's about a recently discovered, supposedly, Leonardo da Vinci, I think it's called Salvator Mundi, which I think translates as Savior of the World. And it's a painting of Jesus
Mm,
that was that may or may not have been done by Leonardo.
mm,
And it's a whole documentary about how this painting was found as what's called a sleeper. And the sleeper is there are art experts who go rummaging through backyard garage sales and so forth, looking for paintings that are somehow there in these odd places where the people who own them or found them don't really understand their value. So you buy up a painting, for $100 or something from a garage sale, and then by the time this particular Da Vinci uh, is finished, it sells for $400 million, and now hangs in the Louvre. Uh,
mm-hmm,
whether it's a real Leonardo or not is an open question. The lost
mm.
Leonardo, your listeners can find it, or you can watch F for Fake
By
uh,
Orson Welles.
by Orson Welles.
Yeah, which is in my notes because I'm gonna go get that. I love
Terrific.
Orson Welles. Yeah, his voice and his art style is just incredible. So, that's on my list to watch. I'm taking notes as I'm reading my questions. This is great. I appreciate that. Since you talked about value, there's an incredible moment in the book where you really dive into the art world, learning about the hierarchy of artists and their works and what their value are compared to the different artists. How does that how does this reflect on your own discovery? Because you were getting into how, like, your experience in forgery. Did you have the same experience getting into the value of different artists' works?
Well, art is sort of a popularity contest on one level, and artists in favor and out of favor come and go over time. Uh, there are artists who suddenly um, are rediscovered and valued, artists who are ahead of their time, where I don't think Van Gogh ever sold a painting in his whole life.
Mm,
And today, Van Gogh's irises, I think, were sold for $55 million. This man never sold a painting.
yeah.
Um, uh, it's interesting that when Nixon and Kissinger went to China, uh, Kissinger was supposedly in conversation with Zhou Enlai and said something like, "What do you think of the French Revolution?" And Zhou said, "Too early to tell." Um, and so you wonder, what today. So when Stravinsky wrote The Rite of Spring,
Mm,
Sacre de Printemps, and it was, I think, 1913 or something like that, and it caused a riot in the concert hall. Some woman leaned down from a balcony and said, "I have never been so insulted in my life." And
mm,
she just and Stravinsky had to get out of town on a train, and then people were just infuriated by whatever they thought this odd music was.
mm.
But 25 years later, it's the soundtrack to Fantasia.
Yeah.
Dinosaurs fighting,
Yeah.
and nobody thinks anything of it because
Right.
they were ahead. So artists drift in and out of fashion. There's a French Belgian composer named César Franck who wrote a symphony, the symphony in D minor, which is one of my favorite pieces of music. I have never heard it performed in my lifetime live.
Oh.
Never heard it performed live in my lifetime. It is out of fashion. You can get recordings of it, and it's absolutely stunning piece of music. But for whatever reason, it's deemed passe or something like that. And so things go in and out of fashion. By the way, just to tap myself on the shoulder, when I wrote the 7% solution, nobody was interested in Sherlock Holmes.
Really?
Sherlock Holmes had drifted off the radar.
Huh. You brought him back.
I brought him back. I brought
Nice.
Star Trek back.
Yeah,
Those are
you
my
did. You saved a lot of franchises. You're very good at that.
I'm good at recycling.
Or saving, depending on your perspective. There's a big difference between the motion picture and your Star Trek. That's arguably the best. I'm not gonna lie. It's always an argument in our podcast. Oh, is it six or is it two? So we definitely can't credit you enough for those. So we greatly appreciate
I'm
that.
from Hollywood. I'll take it.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So how do you negotiate the balance of honoring the works of, since we're talking about recycling, of Arthur Conan Doyle and injecting your own unique voice?
It's a terrific question to ask and a difficult question to answer.
Mm,
I realize that, yes, for my purposes, Sherlock Holmes becomes a kind of avatar for me up to a point. There are views that I can't put into his mouth,
mhm,
and there are views that I don't of his that I don't want to reflect. In some of there are 60
mm,
Sherlock Holmes stories by Arthur Conan Doyle. There
mhm,
are 4 novellas and 56 short stories, and they're remarkably consistent in quality. But you will learn that Holmes is something of a racist, and
mm,
also occasionally something of an anti-Semite. These
mm,
are not qualities that I wanted to include in any version of Holmes that I wanted to write, so they're not there. Um, by the same token, Arthur Conan Doyle had views that he was disciplined enough not to put into the mouth of Sherlock. Uh, he could, because he was the creator of Sherlock, but he didn't do it. And I'll give you an example. As of 1916, which is to say in the middle of World War I,
mhm.
Arthur Conan Doyle became a convinced and confirmed spiritualist, life in the beyond.
Yeah,
Remember, in World War I, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people were being killed.
right.
People lost fathers, husbands, brothers, sons in this bloodbath. And there was a rise in Ouija boards and seances and
Oh,
communication with the dead. And Doyle was part of this. He had lost a brother, a brother in law, and a son in World War I. So, and he became, to the end of his life in 1930, a confirmed, convinced spiritualist. But
mm,
he never made Holmes anything of the kind. On the contrary, Holmes says to Watson, I take it, Watson, that neither of us are prepared to admit diabolical intrusions into the affairs of men. This agency stands flat footed on the ground. No ghosts need apply. This
yes.
was, I think, a remarkable act of self discipline on his part. And I have to do the same thing. I cannot put words, sentiments, or ideas into Holmes's mouth or head, for that matter, that don't properly belong there insofar as I can determine. I can't make him a woman's liber or something like that because he
Right.
wasn't. He's
Correct.
not. And his whole attitude toward women is very sort of sketchy.
Mm,
And I can't bend that too much.
right.
I don't try to.
You have to keep it grounded in the original verse without making too many tweaks that'll differentiate them.
It's a balancing act. It's a
Right.
tightrope act.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned spiritualism. There's a section in the book where Holmes is trying to figure out how Houdini got through that wall, and they're mentioning the trap door and the carpet, and that there's got to be they just like dive so deeply into it. And I recently read a short story about Houdini's wife that tried to, and you mentioned about seances and Ouija boards, and she used to
Beth.
do, what's that?
Her name was Bess.
Bess, yes, and she was doing a séance every year to because he was always trying to like
Communicate.
yeah, communicate, and she did a séance in L.A., I believe, and it was
Oh,
last month.
I wouldn't be surprised if she did them every year in different places.
Hmm.
My dad wrote a biography of Houdini called Houdini, A Mind in Chains. Houdini,
Hmm.
A Mind in Chains. And we made that into a two-part television series
Oh.
with Adrian Brody as Houdini.
Mhm.
And it was on the History Channel.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we depicted, and we depicted it as accurately as we could, was the friendship and the relationship between Houdini and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes.
Hmm.
Arthur Conan Doyle was in London and saw Houdini walk through a brick wall.
Yes.
It was he was doing his magic show and he walks through a brick wall. And because Arthur Conan Doyle couldn't figure out how Houdini had walked through the brick wall, he decided that Houdini had spiritual powers.
Mm.
And Houdini said, Sir Arthur, it's a trick. Um, and Conan Doyle said, well, of course, you'd have to say that, wouldn't you? Because if you admitted that you had spiritual powers, your career as a magician would be finished.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so he was a little he wasn't on a par with Sherlock Holmes back then.
No, no,
Um,
certainly
and
not.
Holmes always said, if you eliminate the impossible,
Yes, that's
whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. You cannot walk through a brick wall. So,
right.
get real.
Yeah.
Anyway, they later became big enemies, Arthur
Oh,
Conan Doyle and Houdini.
wow.
They, after Houdini's mother died, he was really devastated and wanted very much to communicate with her. And he went around to seances, but he knew all their little tricks. So he kept exposing and offering big rewards to any uh, medium, spiritual medium, who could put him in touch with his mother.
Hmm.
So he bumped into Arthur Conan Doyle in Atlantic City. And they were both, he was doing his medium busting or his magic act, and Doyle was proselytizing with Lady Doyle for spiritualism. And Doyle said to Houdini, Lady Doyle does spirit writing. She can communicate with the dead. Would you like her to try to communicate with your mother? And Houdini said, okay. So, in a hotel in Atlantic City, with the windows shades drawn and some light thrown over a lamp, Doyle and Lady Doyle and Houdini sat down, and she had the pad and pencil in front of her, and she eventually started writing furiously and furiously and furiously, writing,
Hmm.
and and it came out, my boy, you don't know how hard I've tried. At last, I've broken through. I'm so happy to give you this great news from the beyond, blah, blah. And Houdini was overcome. He was
Mm.
crying. He was sobbing. He couldn't believe it. And he just, for 3 days, he was sort of walking on air. Those were his words.
Mm.
Then he started to think about it. And the first thing he thought was, hang on, my mother didn't speak a word of English.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
she only spoke Yiddish.
Yeah.
And then Arthur Conan Doyle got around this by explaining that Lady Doyle, in her spiritual moments, acted as a kind of simultaneous translator.
Yeah.
And Houdini said, yeah, but it was my birthday.
Oh.
She never missed my birthday. You and Lady Doyle, sir, are menaces to mankind.
Wow.
That's what he called them. You and Lady Doyle are menaces to mankind. I guess that was the end of the friendship.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Uh, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's all in my mini series.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna be getting that on as well. I just recently lost my mother, so I can understand
Very
you.
sorry to hear it.
Thank you.
Losing one's losing a parent is a big transition.
Yeah, big time, big time. And it's weird. I kind of used to have dreams. I lost my uncle, who was my father figure, a year before, and frequently I would have like a dream of them, and it's kind of common sense because it's your grieving process to do as such. And I would tell a friend of mine, he's like, maybe you have this spiritual connection, and you can. It's like, no, it's just my mind going, I really want to talk to you again. So I can understand Houdini's plight and not wanting to talk to Conan Doyle again. I was like, no, you'd mess with me there. That's the end for sure. Um, Back to just a quick Star Trek question. How did you end up getting into Star Trek? Because you were not a fan of Star Trek from the original series. How did that whole process?
I had never seen Star Trek.
Yeah.
Um, First of all, for a more detailed discussion of this, I refer your listeners to my memoir.
Hmm.
The memoir is called The View from the Bridge:
Oh,
Memories of Star Trek and a Life in Hollywood, I think published by Viking. And so there's a lot of information about this. But as you point out, I had never seen Star Trek. Um, but I was, I guess, looking for my next movie project after Time, which was my first movie that I wrote and directed,
right.
and that's Malcolm McDowell and Mary Steenburgen and
Great
David
movie.
Warner.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. I love that
Anyway,
one.
a
I have it
friend
on
of
DVD.
that's great. I probably get a nickel for every copy.
Hey, I gave you a nickel.
um, a friend of mine who was an executive at Paramount Pictures, a childhood friend, who said to me, "Nikki, you should come down to Paramount and meet Harve Bennett. And Harve Bennett is in charge of producing the second Star Trek movie for Paramount." Now, the first Star Trek movie that came out, I believe, in 1979,
Mhm.
Star Trek the Motion Picture,
Yep.
had been a runaway production, which had exploded, ballooned into $45 million budget to
Oh
make this
God.
movie in 1979.
Oh,
And it's and whatever anybody thought of the movie, it still made money.
right.
So Paramount said, "Okay, we're going to make another Star Trek movie. We ain't going to spend $5 million on it."
Right.
And Harve Bennett, who was a television producer, he had done the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman and Rich Man, Poor Man, all that. He had done a
Yeah.
lot of television, and they said, "Can you make a good Star Trek movie for it's less than $45 million?" And Harv's comment was, "I can make 5 Star Trek movies for less than $45 million."
There you go.
And they said, "Okay, do one." And somehow, my friend coaxed me into sitting down with Harv, because I had seen Star Trek, channel surfing, and I never stayed with it. I just saw the guy with pointy ears and everybody running around in Dr. Denton's and those ridiculous sets, and I missed everything that was important
Right.
about Star Trek. I just blew right by it. I didn't catch that this was an interracial cast. I didn't that there was Russians on board, that there was women in positions of command. All the things that make it important and remarkable and durable just blew right by me because I couldn't get past sort of what it looked like and whatever.
Too cheesy.
Um, but I did get along with Harve Bennett really well.
Mhm.
We just and he showed me the first movie, and I thought, uh huh. And then he showed me a lot of episodes of it, and I found I was intrigued. I thought, God, this reminds me of something that I like. What is it? Not being the sharpest knife in the drawer, it took me a while to remember that when I was 13 years old, I started reading these novels by a guy who called himself C.S. Forrester. And
Mhm.
C.S. Forrester, I maybe most famous for having written The African Queen, which is a terrific Bogart
Mhm.
movie. But he also wrote The Adventures of Captain Horatio Hornblower. And
Uh,
Hornblower was a captain in the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars. And he had adventures. And he had a girl in every port.
mm.
And when you're 13 years old, adventures and a girl in every port is sounding pretty cool. By the way, I'm about to be 80, and it's still sounding pretty cool to me.
I'd rather
Um, and so,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I was reading all these Captain Hornblower books, or he was Midshipman Hornblower, he was Admiral Hornblower, and so on. And I thought, wow, Star Trek, Captain Kirk is just Hornblower in outer space.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh, I bet I could do that. I
Uh,
if Star Trek is if Starfleet is the Navy and these ships are like submarines or destroyers or something, I can do that.
yeah,
And so that's when I signed on.
perfect. And it worked so well because that dogfight between the Reliant and the battle hurt Enterprise felt like two submarines going at it at sea. It just,
Let me talk about that for a minute, and
mhm.
we'll talk about
Yeah.
influences. There are things that influence you that you're aware of at the time
Hmm.
where you fall hard for something and it just stays with you. Childhood influences, childhood things that the first time you see Bambi or something, it's called an impressionable age
Right.
because it makes a big impression and it doesn't let go. And there are things that you experience as a child, and then there are things that you experience that influence you and you don't even remember that you've been influenced by them.
Right.
Something things that you think have kind of blown right by you and you didn't clock them. So years later, years after I made Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan with that dogfight
Hmm.
at the end, I watched a movie that I'd forgotten, totally forgotten I'd seen. Terrific movie called
Hmm.
The Enemy Below.
Oh.
And The Enemy Below stars Robert Mitchum and Kurt Jurgens and is about a duel between a U.S. destroyer captain and a German U-boat captain.
Oh.
Robert Mitchum is the captain of the destroyer, and Kurt Jurgens is the captain of the U-boat. The Enemy Below. And it's a great Hollywood trivia question because nobody ever who sees the movie ever remembers who directed the movie. And the
Mm.
movie was directed by Dick Powell.
Dick Powell.
Dick Powell, who played, Philip Marlowe and who starred in Midsummer Night's Dream and all those Busby Berkeley movies where he used to sing in a high tenor voice. But he went on, and he was married to June Allison. Um, he went on to be to start as a song and dance man, and then he got his voice lowered and he played Detective Philip Marlowe. And then he went on to direct a lot of television and some movies. And
Mm.
this movie he directed, The Enemy Below, turned out I had remembered it very well and then forgot I'd remembered it very well and simply recreated it or did an imitation of it in the climax of The Wrath of Khan.
Mm. Beautiful. That's so indirectly influenced. That's a perfect way to say it. But it's still majestic, and it's still fans' number one Star Trek movie.
Well, let me make my own case.
Oh,
All art, all art, from the first guy who made a handprint on the wall of a cave.
yeah.
All art is a history of cut and paste.
There it is.
The, um, all, let's say, what is the Odyssey? The Odyssey is a fanboy sequel to the Iliad.
Mm.
Same characters,
Yeah.
it's continuation. What is
Right.
the Aeneid? What is the Aeneid? The Aeneid is a continuation of the Odyssey.
Right.
This goes on and on. Mozart reorchestrated Handel's Messiah. Everybody takes a whack at Bizet's Carmen. How many times and how many ways have people added and riffed on or subtracted, or, this brings us back to forgeries and copies
Yes.
and imitations.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And um one of the things bringing us back to the book, the pacing of a detective novel is very delicate, and the dropping clues and building tension and red herrings. Do you have to spend like this whole almost with I don't know if you ever watched Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where they have that like board, and it's a famous meme now where the guy's like screaming at the camera and there's a board behind him with like all these clues and red lines. So do you have to like really map out the story before you put it together, or is it just second nature to you now that you've written Holmes so long?
That's a really interesting question, and it's hard to entirely answer, and it has to do with the kind of state of flow in which artists find themselves. This is a digression, but you'll find it worth your while. The In Plato, we learn that the Oracle of Delphi tells Socrates that he's the wisest man in Greece.
Hmm.
And Socrates says, well, oh, that can't be right. So all I need to disprove the oracle is to find somebody wiser than me.
Hmm.
So he goes all through Greek society, talking to people, looking for someone who's wiser. And eventually he gets around to what he calls the poets. And
Hmm.
I think poets means artists. And they were probably all guys back then. No, no, no.
No women. Yeah.
But he said, these people who write and paint and sculpt so insightfully about the human condition are bound to be wiser than me. He says, imagine my surprise when I found that the poets, the artists, were the stupidest people I spoke to. He said, they were like children, they were infantile,
Hmm.
except when they did their art. And then they go into a kind of trance and take dictation from God. And this they call inspiration. And
Hmm.
then when it's over, they come out and they go back to being jerks again. And I'm often asked, and I probably talk about this in my memoir, when people say, how do you do this? And the
Hmm.
short answer is, I don't know. Um,
There it is. Just
I
happened.
kind of wasn't there. Up to a point, I can say, yes, well, I make outlines or I do a lot of research. And by the way, there's a reason that Plato didn't want writers in the Republic, because
Mhm.
writers are liars. That's what we do. We lie.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when you're sitting on talking to Johnny Carson on the Tonight Show, or somebody say, how did you do whatever? You make up little stories. And there are anecdotes surrounding the act of creation. I guess W.S. Gilbert of Gilbert and Sullivan was asked, how did you write the Mikado? And he said, well, I was sitting at my desk and I had a Japanese sword that was hanging over my desk, and the sword fell down. Gosh, it almost decapitated me.
You
but
really
it
would.
but it missed. But I picked up the sword, and it was a Japanese sword, and I got the idea to write the Mikado. Now this is a kind of a cool story. It may even be a true story, but it doesn't explain how he wrote the Mikado.
No.
It's just a little anecdote. And
Yeah.
I think we're in writers and artists generally who, when asked how they create, are inclined to make it up. Just make up how they you provide and you may not even intentionally be wanting to deceive, but you want to be able to say something and say, well, yeah, this and this and this happened,
Hmm.
and whatever. And sometimes you can get very, very detailed answers when you read Stephen Sondheim talking about his work. He is extremely articulate about his work process and how he wrote Send in the Clowns. He said, I was writing for Glynis Johns. It was her solo, and she didn't have a lot of breath, so it couldn't be long, sustained notes. So it had to be short phrases. Isn't it rich?
Mm,
It's whatever. And so it
yeah.
was so easy. So he can explain these things on a very intellectual level. It simply doesn't account for the fact that the man was a genius.
And there you go. So the answer is you're a genius. That's it. And it shows in all your work. So I'll take that. That's the answer I got from this. And I know my listeners are saying, yeah, that's right. um, I know you got a lot going on today. I just have a few more questions. I promise I won't keep you here all day, but I'm having a great time chatting with you. So it's just natural. um, I want to know there's some characters I really love in the book, and you were talking about different artists and writers. Which characters do you feel that surprised you the most and became more interesting and more complex or behaved unexpectedly as you were writing this?
Are we talking about Sherlock Holmes and the real thing? Is that
Yes. Yeah, your book.
well, as I say, once that man in Pittsburgh accused me of being a forger, I got very interested in the subject of forgery. And I
Yeah.
began reading about people like Han von Meegren, who forged Vermeers. I began watching Orson Welles, the F for
Fake.
Fake, and learning about Elmire de Horry and Clifford Irving. Um, and I sort of collected a database, if you like, of
Mm,
all. And at some point, I learned about the most famous art dealer in the world, who was
mm,
a man named Sir Joseph Duveen, Duveen. And Joseph Duveen, also known as, I think, Lord Millbank, um, was a dealer in the late 19th and early part of the 20th century. He was the most famous art dealer in the world.
mhm.
And he sold and specialized in old masters. And old masters means, Da Vinci and Rembrandt and, that crowd,
Yeah.
Raphael and whatever. And he only dealt in old masters, and the only old masters that were any good were his old masters. And he sold to, and the other thing he did was he created museums all around the world. He created the Frick in New York,
Mm,
and the one in Pasadena, which I'm blanking on the name, but the Tate in London, the National Gallery in Washington, um, and probably the National Gallery in London. He created all these collections of fabulous paintings, probably all from his, stash.
mm,
Um, and he had an authenticator, a guy, very famous American, uh, who's a guy. Um, he worked for Isabella Stewart Gardner. Bernard Berenson was the
okay.
man's name,
Mhm.
and Bernard Berenson would authenticate Duveen's artists and say,
Mhm.
yes, this is a genuine Botticelli or so forth. And a guy named Colin Simpson wrote a book called Artful Partners, in
Mm.
which he revealed that Bernard Berenson would get a kickback on every painting that he authenticated.
Oh.
And more than that, we learned something else, that what Duveen specialized in was selling old master portraits of women to rich bachelors or widowers or older men who liked paintings of girls.
Like Charles First.
And, and if the girls weren't pretty enough, Duveen's workshop would go to work on them a little bit. You can call it restoration, you
Ooh.
could call it preservation,
Yeah.
or you could call it forgery. But anyway, and then Bernard Berenson would sign off on it. Oh yes, this is an original something.
Yeah.
He would sell Rembrandts, to Marshall Field of the Marshall Field department store for like a gazillion dollars. For he once sold him 8 Rembrandts,
Oh.
and they're probably mostly Rembrandt, but not 100%
Yeah,
Rembrandt
exactly. It
because
was milestone.
it had little help.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. That brings me to the character, the authenticator. I love the way you describe him. It sounds like some people that I've met in my own personal life. They might have had a hunchback or a way about them, but when they perceive themselves, it's almost like they can throw themselves into silk, and it just gives you a general pull and attraction to them. So one of my favorite characters is is the hunchback in your book. It's just an interesting way that you really dove into the description and how the whole process took place. So I got a
Yeah,
kick
you
out of
put
that.
these things together, and again, we go back to, how did I do it? I don't know. I wasn't really there.
Yeah.
It sounds a little highfalutin, but it isn't meant to be. Um, at some point, I had to create the equivalent of Bernard Berenson in this in my novel, an
Yeah.
authenticator, and he's a corrupt
Hmm.
authenticator. And for some reason, I got the idea. His name in the novel is Garibaldi, and I think I took that from the Italian freedom fighter
Hmm.
Garibaldi, who unified Italy. And somewhere I know that Giuseppe Verdi, the opera composer, was very influenced by Garibaldi, and Verdi once wrote an opera called Rigoletto, which was about a humpback jester. Um, and somehow I sort of melded them together.
You meshed all the pieces and
And
made this
came up with
character.
an authenticator who was a hunchback whose name was Rigoletto,
Yeah.
or Garibaldi, I
About
should
yeah.
say. Um, so you cut and paste.
Yeah. Back to the theme. So when you look back at the real thing, is there one image or scene or line that you feel most proud of that encapsulates the heart of the novel?
Wow. If there were such a line, I think it would be handy at the top of my head. But
Mm,
since it isn't, um, the closest I can come is, I think, something that I wrote for the flap of the book, the jacket flap, which
mm,
is basically, if you can't tell the difference, what is the difference?
mm,
If you have, just to pursue this for a moment, two paintings, let's say, of a smiling lady, and they're identical,
hmm.
cannot by any technical or technological means tell one from another. They're absolutely identical in every way. It's a hypothetical case.
Hmm.
And one was painted by Leonardo da Vinci,
Hmm.
and the other was painted by me. But you can't tell the difference. There's nothing to distinguish the age, the quality of the paint, whatever you want to list. Then why is one worth more than the other?
What's the name? But you can't tell them apart.
You can't tell, but you can't
Oh,
tell which one. You
which one
know,
is which? Yeah.
it's either a Da Vinci or it's a Nicholas Meyer, but you can't tell.
Right.
And the best answer I ever heard, and it's in the novel,
Hmm.
is that one could not exist without the other.
Yeah.
That whichever one of them came first, you can't tell, but whichever one of them came first, we place a great premium on originality.
Hmm. So
So what we're saying is that we place a great value on originality. The first man who said that a woman's lips were like a rose
Hmm.
said something pretty cool. The
Yeah.
second guy who said it, not quite so cool, because it
Right.
had been said before. But if a guy says a woman's lips are like a blooming flower, it's not a forgery, it's not a copy, it's what the French called à la manière de. It's in the style of. It kind of approximates a woman's lips were like a rose, but he just says it a little enough differently. But originality seems to, again, that first handprint on the wall of the cave, the first time he said a woman's lips are like a rose, the first guy to write the Hallelujah chorus, that's what we value.
Right.
And you can't tell which one came first is a problem.
Right. It's brilliant. I appreciate so much you spending this hour with me in the Captain's Quadrant. This has been a fantastic experiment of minds and sharing of great knowledge and your amazing artwork. I really appreciate it. Um, are there any other projects that you also are working on besides the book? Something you want to share or let listeners know where they can find the book aside from local bookstores?
Well, forthcoming is this novel which was just published, Sherlock Holmes and the Real Thing,
Hmm.
which is at bookstores and also available on Amazon. And there's an audio book of it and so forth,
Oh,
which
wow.
is read by David Robb, who plays the Doctor on Downton Abbey.
Oh,
So that's what I'm been working on at the moment,
hmm,
and I'll be on to other things
pretty quickly.
eventually. Got to finish this book tour.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, please go buy a copy of the book. It's a fantastic book. I've just immersed myself in the world of Sherlock Holmes recently, thanks to Mr. Meyer. And I really appreciate it. We are happy that you joined us for this hour. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe and rate the podcast 5 if you've enjoyed this wonderful topic and the great Nicholas Meyer. Everyone, have a stunningly good day.